Good morning. This is Robert McGregor. Um, I'm the Director of STEAM Powered Education, and I would like to go through some tips on how to make a model today. In this video, which is about 35 minutes long, you will find out about various things that help you make your model to perfection, or as good as I can do. I'm no absolute expert, but I've had a lot of experience and made all the mistakes that you're about to. So I thought I might give you a head start, a leap ahead on producing something that you're going to be very proud of. Okay, the first thing you do when you buy a model is you look at the box, obviously. I like to scan the whole box before I go into the inside, because there's a lot of information here that will help you certainly with purchasing it, whether you want to buy it or not, whether it's the right size, what this thing is that you're going to make, the context of it. So I think there are, the box is actually, a bit like the front cover of a book, or the blurb behind it. It gives you a good idea about what you're buying, and if you're wargaming, as some of you might do once you've built up a few models, you might like to sort of put it into the right sort of environment so that you understand that this fits into early World War II or late World War II, etc. Anyway, so first thing I notice is the title. It's a Wesp. I think that means wasp in German. Licht Field Haubitz. I think that's like a field howitzer, and it's looks like it's an old chassis of something else. The model kit number there isn't very important. This is more for Italieria, the manufacturer of it. The scale there, 1 to 72, that's very important. 1 to 72 is very important because that gives you an idea of how big it's going to be. And if you've got a whole bunch of other 1 to 72 models, you can fit them into the scenarios that you want to do. So, and next along is decals. Then obviously this is a German tank. So those are the German decals. It includes 2 figures. It's made by Italieria. And then you've got over here what the contents are. You've got 2 sprues. You've got some decals and some tracks. It says content images not to scale. Then at the back you've got paint schemes, colour schemes. You've got 3 different versions, one in the Mediterranean, one in the Italian front, and one in Russia. Well, it's actually not Russia, it's Poland. Krakow is south of Danzig, which I think is now Gdansk. And then you've got different types of colours that you are going to possibly use. Now I've put some numbers there because I've actually used the Airfix equivalent of those. And then on the other side here, you've got some information about the actual tank itself. And it says it was based on a Panzerkampfwagen 2 light tank. So the chassis is, that means this part here where the tracks are and the base are a Panzer II, which is by the sort of 1941, 1942, they became obsolete. That means they weren't any use anymore. So they thought, well, what are we going to do with the chassis? I know, let's change them into a self-propelled howitzer that we can take into battle with the tanks and with the armoured vehicles. So it's protected and therefore would be quite useful. Okay, so that's the outside of the box. Also, there's just one more thing. You'll see it'll tell you the length in centimetres. So this says 6.3 centimetres. So I'm expecting the model to be about that long. Okay, here's my little centimeters. So it's going to be about that long, which isn't very big, but it'll go nicely with all my other tanks and various things that we've built together. Okay, so let's look inside. Inside we have tank tracks. We have the decals. A bit tired looking. They've been in my garage for a long time, gathering mold. Then we've got a sprue, another sprue, and then we've got the instructions here. Okay, so I always like to start, although it's tempting to have a look at all of this and then take it off. I don't take it off. First of all, I look at the instructions, open it up, and it's got A, B, and C, which is interesting because this is sprue A, this is sprue B, and this is sprue C, and they relate to whatever it will say here. So if it says 3A, then it'll be on this sprue, and it'll be number 3, which is somewhere around here. There we are, that one there. Okay. Now I'm not going to take it off because I like to do all the painting first on the sprue. The reason I like to do that is that it's much easier when you come to finally touch up something, touch up the paint at the end of your model. If you've painted it before on the sprue, it's also much easier to handle. You can hold it, you can position it, whereas these fiddly little bits like these shell casings, better to paint them there. I know you're going to have to finish them off at the end, but it's better to paint them because they're steady, they're controlled, they're not fiddly, you don't have to put them in a clamp. So paint everything on the sprue first. That means you've got to get hold of your paints. Okay, so what I've decided is I've decided to paint on the sprue all of the bits mainly in a rust colour. So that can be my sort of base colour. A reason I did that was because essentially when metal the paint comes off metal, it very quickly rusts. So on the front cover, they've got a sort of metal look about it underneath. I don't think that's realistic. I think it would be more of a rust. So I've done that. Also, I've done the tracks in a rust, but I've done it roughly. I haven't done it fully, so that you can see just underneath, you can see some of the metal as well. That's pretty good there. They've done that. And that's what I'm doing there. So that gives it an authentic look. I've painted the soldiers, the two men, the artillery, German artillery, in the German artillery colour, which is a sort of mid-grey green. It's that kind of colour. Look that up on the internet. So I'm going to do obviously their faces and various things like that. And I've got as far as the instructions, the first instructions, which are to stick the superstructure together and start sticking the wheels on. So what I've done with the wheels, I've the outside of the wheels on a German Panzer II chassis are rubber on the outside and metal on the inside. And then you've got the cog. Now that cog there is attached to the engine. So basically that is the driving wheel. That was not made of rubber. Obviously the cogs need to be very strong to grip the tracks to turn the whole vehicle. And so I've started sticking those on, the wheels on, and I've got to that stage there. Okay, so I'm just touching up some of the tank tracks. Once I've put the tank tracks on, I've realized that I haven't painted behind. This is something that's quite common. You think you've painted everything on the sprue that you thought was necessary, and you realize there's more, but that's inevitable. I challenge any model maker to say otherwise. But as long as you touch up as you're doing it, then you won't have any trouble later when you're trying to put the tank tracks on and then realize you haven't painted a bit, and then try and dig your paintbrush inside and then make a mess of the tank track and so on and so forth. So these are little techniques that you learn as you get experience. The other thing is, you can see I'm just trying to put the lid back on the paint. That's one of the techniques that you learn. Your paint will very quickly dry out unless you make sure you put the lid back on as soon as you finish with it. Got a little paint left on here, so I'm just going to touch up anything I haven't quite finished. There's a bit there, there's a bit there. So another technique that you need to know is cleaning the brush. Cleaning the brush, never dip your brush in and swish it all around. Never do that. Just dip it in once, so you've got water on it, or sorry, liquid on it. This is turpentine, and then get your tissue. Again, look, I've used it many times. You can use it lots and lots of times. And just dip it in again, catch some more turpentine, and clean it on the tissue. When you clean it on the tissue, you can see the paint coming off, and you can see when you've run out of turpentine, of paint and turpentine mix on the tissue, you can see that it's clean. And then you haven't muddied your turpentine mix in here, which preserves the terps that you've got. I always think that's a really good technique, because you're just going to keep your equipment together longer. As you can see, as soon as I've finished, I put the lid on the turpentine back on. Reason being, one, it evaporates, so you'll lose liquid. But two, the smell of turpentine is quite powerful, and it's not very good for you. So always put the lid back on as soon as you've finished. Put it to one side. Okay, so when another technique is when you're cutting out tiny little pieces, always when you're cutting, and if you're trying to do the second cut, I mean, you could try and peel it off like this, but it's fiddly. If you're doing a cut, the second cut, try and put your finger over the bit, because it will fly off otherwise, and then you might lose it. So second cut, first cut, second cut, douche. Yeah. Okay, just get all those wheels off. There we go. And you can see little bits attached to them as well, which are very fiddly, very difficult to get off. You can also use a little piece, tiniest piece of sandpaper, but with such a tiny piece, it's going to be tricky. And also you're going to rub off some of the paint. I've carefully painted those Don't want to rub off too much of the black paint. Always when you're model making, you want to be efficient. You don't want to be having to redo everything. It's really boring. It just makes the whole thing tedious. There we are. Going to have to get the black paint out anyway to paint the boots of the soldiers and possibly the belts as well. Working in 1:72, the soldiers are really tiny and you're going to have to find some brushes which are very fine. It's very important that you preserve your brushes, clean them well, clean them thoroughly, so that they don't splay when you next use them. You can see this one here is slightly splayed. I mean, it's inevitable, but what you want to do is try and keep the brush as long as possible with a nice point to the end, so you can do fine detail. Okay, so another technique I like to use in order for glue not to go everywhere is when you're gluing bits into position, very fiddly bits. So I like to put the glue down on a piece of scrap paper, just enough for what you're gluing at the time. And I get the scalpel. Scalpels are really fine points, which are very, very useful for cutting, but also for helping you glue. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting a piece of glue on the scalpel in the positions I need. Let's get a bit more. Doesn't seem to have worked that one. And that just gets exactly the right amount of glue in the position you want it. You're only sticking tiny wheels on, so you don't need a lot of glue. It's more than enough. That fits nicely on. Sometimes it does pay to try and practice pushing them on without the glue, so that you know that they fit in nicely. But the glue tends to soften up the holes, so you can usually fit them in once you've glued them. Okay, a bit more. 1, 2, 3. The other thing about using the amount of glue I have is it saves glue. You know, sometimes people squirt so much glue out, or it comes out really rapidly. That's why I think, well, if it's coming out really rapidly, it's under pressure of some sort, then just put it on the scrap paper and use that. Put the lid back on the glue and use the stuff that squirted out rather quickly. There we go. And the other side. So these will need a bit of a touch up. You can see like little bits that aren't black. I can do those. That's not a problem. But it's looking pretty good. It's looking quite authentic. Quite realistic. Okay, I'm on to part 3 of the instructions. And you'll see these little letters B, E, C in black or white with a black background, black circle around them. They correspond to a colour scheme, and that colour scheme is at the front here. Now, Airfix will have a different code, but you have to look very carefully at instructions because you'll see numbers with the sprue A, so 42A here, and those correspond obviously to bits that you stick on, but these letters here correspond to the colors that they want you to paint them. So B is a white gloss, so inside the tank it'll be white. E is a Schwarzgrey, black grey, okay, which is obviously a dark kind of grey, so that will be for the seat. And then the shells and the shell casings are C, which is a gunmetal. Okay, so I would have preferred to have done those maybe brass, and maybe the top gunmetal. I might do it that way. Anyway, so I'm going to do a bit of painting now. Okay, so I've got quite a long way. You can see I've decided to paint the shells and the casings just a slightly different colour. And you can see that the detail there is quite good. Oops, I just noticed something. Let's come off. And obviously it's still not finished, nowhere near, but it's coming along nicely. I'm quite pleased with it. It just took a while to get all of this together. So we've got the chassis now, we've got the shell cartridges in the stern, we've got the tracks on, yeah, and it's all coated in a layer of paint, a sort of rusty layer, which I can alter now. I'm glad we've got the shell casings in. Now, what I wanted to show you was that the gun here. Another tip for everyone, a technique that I've learned is especially when you're doing moving parts, because this should be able to move up and down, you need to test how things fit together before you put them together. It's very important that you do that because, especially with moving parts, you don't know how it fits together, and if you get it wrong, or if you glue the wrong thing in, then it's a real problem. You can't undo that very easily. So here, instructions on how to fit this together. I've got 3 bits, and it looks like you have to put them into this slot here. Now, sometimes the slots don't fit, so you've got to practice putting things in. It might even be better to take one of these off, just to find out how they fit in, whether they slot in well enough or what. Okay, yeah. So that's where they go in. Oh, it does fit in nicely. Again, I'm only practicing putting this together. I'm not actually gluing anything in place yet. I just want to make sure that everything fits in before I do any gluing. Then I've got a moving part, which is a nice feature. The trouble is, as soon as children get hold of this, they think it's a toy, not a model, although it is a toy in a way. The thing about it is that it's very fragile. This is becoming, you see, the second slot is becoming really tricky. I cannot fit the second slot in. But ultimately, that's what you want to have. I'll fit that in a minute. Oh wait, here we go. No, still not fitting in. I'm going to have to cut that up a little bit. So I'm going to have to cut that open a bit, just a touch with the scalpel, or I can put a touch of glue on it to soften it up. It looks like it's the length though, so I'm just going to have to gouge out a little bit make it a little bit wider. Then once I've stuck those in, I don't have to glue the moving part. Okay. Okay, so we're on the final stages here. I've painted it now. The gun moves. Just found out an area that I didn't paint, so I'm going to go over that. There's that bit there. Gun's a bit wobbly. Strange. Okay, that needs to be sorted out. The hull has been done and it's been painted, as you can see. So you've got a bit of a rust colour there, and you've got the tracks. It needs to be a bit tidied up. You've got the ammunition rack at the back, and when it's all stuck together, it'll look pretty good. In fact, I like to think that when you've done it properly, it fascinates people. They want to look at closer. They want to look closer at it. They want to see inside. They want to see the fire extinguisher, for instance, there that I've made. Yeah, so a lot of good things together. That has come loose. That's a shame. Okay, I'll sort that out. Okay, just turn the volume down. Okay, so there's a little bit more colour now. Gun is pretty much sorted out now. And I've done 3 different colours now to give it the camouflage effect. And there's the underside, the chassis, and then it all fits together like that. Looks pretty cool. And hopefully, when in a war game surrounded by foliage, it's actually useful camouflage. This was camouflage made for the Eastern Front in Prikowo, which is in Poland, near Gdansk, or I think it was called Gdansk. It was called something else. Danzig, I think. Okay, so I've made the model. Now I'm applying the decals. You want to put them in water, obviously, for about a minute or 2. So I dunk them in the water, leave them there. After a minute or so, just take them out. If I can find my scalpel. There we go. Now imagine that I've had those in for a couple of minutes. They're now ready to use. Now a tip I would recommend, oh by the way, I cut these off with a scalpel from the other decals. The other decals are from a different different front. I'm going to do mine from Prikowo, Russia. So it's this one here. So it has 41 and it has that. These have C and 11 and B. So what I've done the first 2 already, and the way I've done it is you have to test whether you can pull them off first using a paintbrush. Don't use your fingers a lot because they tend to get stuck to your fingers. Your fingers are too clumsy. This is a great tool. See how it's swishing around there? So I can then get to the back here, and there's a 41 on the side according to my instructions, a 41 back there on the left. So I'm going to scrape it off using the paintbrush and get my decal background paper really close to it so that I can then just apply it instantly straight onto the area I need. No faffing around with trying to maneuver it too much into the right position. It's great. The paintbrush is really useful for getting underneath it. And there we go, it's coming off now. and then obviously it's in the wrong position, it's sideways, so we need to maneuver it into position. Now if you haven't got enough water on it, just get a little bit more water from your pot. Okay, a little bit more water on the brush, and then just plonk it on, and immediately it lifts. You don't want to do this too many times though. If you do this too many times, the glue underneath it gets watered down, so it doesn't stick anymore. That's another thing I've learnt over the times, the years of doing, of making models. Now again, if you've got now too much water on it, you want to reduce the water. Use your cloth, wipe off your brush, and then make sure it's in position there. See, now it's in position. Check where it's supposed to be. Looks like it's supposed to be a little bit higher, so maybe get a little bit more water. Again, you don't want to do this too often. If you do this too often, you lose the stickiness of the glue behind it. So this decal paper behind has got a kind of a glue on it, and if you lose too much glue, then you'll end up it not sticking for very long. So I'm going to let that dry now. It's in position. Oops. Okay, 41. It's straightish. Let's try and straighten it absolutely perfectly. It's taking a while. Oh dear. That's getting too far up now. Just lift it a bit. Okay, that's as good as I'm going to get it. I don't want to mess with it too much. Okay, and then on the other side, you've got the swastika. Well, not swastika, but it's the German symbol of the Second World War. Identify it so it doesn't get shot by its own side. I'm putting a little bit more water on it because I have a feeling this is drying out. Yeah, I think it is. So I'm going to lift it a little bit. Put a bit more water on it. There we go. Not too much. Just enough to make sure it comes off. Now these are old decals, so this isn't lifting very well. In fact, it seems to be stopping completely. So get from another side, tack it from another side, maybe bend the paper. There we are. I can see it lifting now. There we go. So, get close to the area you want it on. Check where it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be at the same level as the 41. Put it on. Lift off the paper. Remove the paper. And get a little bit more water on it, so you can maneuver it into position. Not too much, of course. Just check where it's supposed to be. There we are, perfect. Just there. So we've got 41 on one side. 41's a lot bigger in this than here. But hey. There we are. Still, it's the wrong. So I'm going to put it there instead. Now again, you don't want to do this too often, and I've probably done it too much. But I'm really not happy with the position. It seems to be obscured by the lump. Some kind of a lump there. Don't like it. And it's supposed to be in the same size, same height as the German markings. Okay, right, so we've got 41 there, 41 there, 41 there, swastika there, or German markings, Second World War markings. And then I'm going to do another one on the side there, so that's here. Get a bit of water, put it on just to make sure it's not re-sticking itself to the backing paper. I'm going to fold the backing paper a bit just to, yeah, there we go. So I can get underneath it. and then check where it's supposed to be. It's probably about there. There we go. Straighten it up. So you can see how advantageous using a brush is. And then the last one. Let's fold this again, just to get it to lift. There we go. Sometimes it's a good idea to twist the brush as you pull it off, so twisting it is a good technique. Okay, now the last one is, I'm referring now back to the instructions on the back there because it's not very detailed with the colour version. You can just about see it. Anyway, I've pulled off the tiniest decal and it goes just here underneath the 41. Okay, there we go. Let's push it into position and then try my brush, and that should pull the water off and it'll stick much better now. There we go. Perfect. Okay, and then there is another one here. Let's see, what else have we got? Oh, we've got these tiny little things. Where are they? No. No. Okay, I think we're done. We are officially finished. I hope you enjoyed it. Okay, this is another thing I like to do, is put them in the context. So I've found some old scenery from various things, and I've got my tank. We could even drive it up into the shell hole. Let's make sure he stands properly. Lean him against the tank. There we go. And a bit of foliage behind. And maybe zoom in a bit. Anyway, we can do all sorts of things. Just to show you, how cool everything looks when you put things together.